A very warm welcome from the University of Aberdeen Business School. We are delighted to welcome so many businesses, stakeholders and alumni to this discussion this afternoon. My name is Martin Meyer. I'm the Dean and Head of the Business School. Our school seeks to do world-class research and education to deliver real-world impact. We have adopted a mission to power change in uncertain times for better businesses and better lives. While we could not foresee the predicament we all find ourselves in right now, we feel it's very much the right mission to have now to help all our stakeholders manage a sustainable transition to the new normal. Our school will turn a youthful 100 years this year, and we are part of a university that just turned 525. So perhaps this institution, which has successfully encountered more change than perhaps many others, is the right place to explore how we can develop to meet the challenges of the new normal way of working. We are proud to be working with yourselves, with businesses, other stakeholders, alumni, members of this institution, and greatly appreciate you joining us. In what seems to be unprecedented times, organizations and people around the world are adapting new ways of working. Organizations have implemented short-term changes in ways of working to meet business demands and to enable their workforce to work from home. Today, we will discuss what normal working life might look like, what changes can employees expect to see in training and development, flexibility and performance management. We have a facility to ask questions. Please do so through Trevor's discussions using the chat box, and we will try to address as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the talk. I should mention this session is being recorded and will be shared across social media. Let me now move to introducing the speaker. Dr. Trevor Morrow is a senior lecturer in management studies at our business school and program leader for the MBA Global and the MSc International Human Resource Management. Before joining the business school, Trevor was senior lecturer in HRM at Liverpool Business School. He's passionate about teaching and scholarship within the areas of human resource management, international business and strategy, and just now the 4th edition of his textbook on strategic HRM is out. So over to you, Trevor. COVID-19, the new normal way of working, reopening and reinventing companies. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Martin. I'm delighted to be here today. As happens in these occasions, we've had a few technical issues getting here, but that's the environment we're operating in. So whenever Martin and I discussed this in the first webinar for the Development Trust, obviously COVID-19 is front and centre in all our thinking and all our focus. With my background in human resource management, one of the things that I was very interested in was the narrative and the discussion around the new norm and what the new norm is going to look like, what way it's going to affect work, and also in the context of the environment, we're reopening, and what does that mean for companies? And I think companies and organisations are actually going to have to reinvent themselves, and I think that's going to be a big focus of moving forward. Okay, so my colleague Lucia is going to help me share the slides with you. So if you can move to the next slides, Lucia. This is a bit like we had in the daily briefings. So some images I think images are very powerful, and my children actually helped me pick these images, and some of the key images we've had during COVID and online shopping, homeschooling, the use of technology, etc. So to try and give a flavour for how things have changed, will that change stay the same, or will it actually be something will we have a very different new norm? Okay. And obviously some of the key people there, Captain Tom, who has been universally admired, etc., in terms of what he's done in the UK during this period. So next slide, please, Lucia. Okay, so I think a a big focus that Martin and I have discussed, one of the things is how we're going to build the momentum from this first session into roundtables and focus and discussion and engagement. And we're hearing a lot of discussion now about how businesses are reopening, how sectors are reopening, how schools will reopening, etc. And one of the big things that we're thinking about, and there's been a lot of discussion of this in the last 3 to 4 months, is are we now facing a new beginning? Are we going to this reinvention? Is it going to be not just a reopening of businesses and the economy and sectors, etc., but a new beginning? And the critical questions then are, what does that new beginning look like? What will businesses and industry and sector look like? What's the role of government in this process as well? Okay, so that's the theme for our session really this afternoon, this idea of not just reopening, but a new beginning, and looking at it through the lens, because of my background in human resources and people management. So next slide, please, Lucia. Okay, so why does this reopening require a reinvention? Okay, so only weeks ago, businesses were shutting down and operations we were mothballing core assets. Okay, now governments are asking organisations with unprecedented speed to restart their engines, to bring back national economies. Okay, and one of the things we've seen is the challenges for organisations of actually doing that. So what were the challenges with 2 metres social distancing, moving to 1 metre social distancing, etc. And one of the things you become aware of actually, and I don't think we thought about this previously in terms of how important certain things are to the economy, how important schools are to actually making the economy work. Because if our children can't go to school, the whole economy grinds down. So suddenly the importance of school and education and opening up schools again is the critical kickstart back to the economy. And then the idea of 1 metre social distancing as well, how does that open up the service sector? How does it open up hospitality and retailing, etc.? Okay, so we need to think about what the social, political and fiscal actions that will drive that. We've had a lot of discussion about the economy, and I was fascinated yesterday that the Bank of England have announced that they actually think it will be a V-shaped recovery, that the economy is going to recover very, very quickly. Unlike other recessions and other economic downturns, that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. And that is positive for obviously for the economy, positive for organisations, but how will that actually work? What will the fiscal stimulations be around that? So just anecdotally, yesterday in the UK, we had 12,000 job cuts announced. Okay, major companies, John Lewis, EasyJet, etc. Okay, we had high-profile championship football team, Wigan, which has gone into administration. And they were regarded as a very financially secure organisation, which were very well managed. So you can start seeing the impact very, very quickly. We're going to look at the idea of leaders and leadership briefly. So leaders need to detail plans of how to return their businesses to at least partial, if not full operation. Okay. And before this session, I sat in on our principal in the university and our director of finance, giving us an overview of how we're moving forward. And I found that incredibly useful as a member of staff. And I think that's the challenge that leaders have in terms of communicating the narrative and the message. What is the short, medium and long term future likely to be? What are the scenarios which are planning out? Worst case scenario, middle case scenario, best case scenario. And I certainly think that's something employees are very keen to understand. What are the implications for our organisation? Okay. So to reopen and outmanoeuvre uncertainty requires a programme of reinvention. Okay, so I see this as an Accenture have been very central into. I found their work very, very good. One of the major management consultancy organisations in this idea of a 5-step commitment to a programme of reinvention. So within these 5 steps, and I'm delighted to see this one first with an HR hat on, put people first. Place caring at the core in your organisation. That idea of soft HR, people as the most important asset. Design spaces that work. Solve in phases. Redesign for businesses unusual. And I think that's the reality we're facing. Businesses, the new norm is going to be unusual to us, and it's going to be quite different. Commit to an elastic cost structure, create the fuel for growth in the business as well. How are you going to generate new revenue streams, new opportunities? Get future ready, create next generation agility as well, the idea of agility. And it's fascinating that I've been involved in higher education as an academic for 25 years, and all these narratives have been regularly discussed, but I think we now have the touchstone and the actual point now where we can really engage in these things very, very heavily. Okay, and actually, instead of just rhetoric, we turn it into reality. I've heard lots of these things discussed in terms of rhetoric in the last 20, 25 years at various points. Okay, particularly in terms of the digital revolution of the early 2000s, the economic downturn in the mid to late 2007 onwards. What was going to happen? I think now, because this is such a global focus, this is really an opportunity for this idea of get future ready and make sure that we're in a position to deal with these things again in the future. Next slide, please, Lucia. So, despite ongoing uncertainty, clearly reopening has begun. Interestingly, I'm in Northern Ireland, I'm home in Northern Ireland, and we're slightly ahead of the rest of the UK in terms of businesses reopening because we've had a lower R rate and we've a relatively, we don't have densely populated towns and cities as unlike other parts of the UK. So retailing and shops and a lot of other areas have actually reopened. Social distancing has been eased. So I suppose the phase we're at now is what we would call the phase we're entering, which is the next phase. So we've had phase one, which was the now moving into the next rapid response to disruption of operations and massive collapse in demand. Okay, huge collapse in demand for products and services. So if you look at things like the global airline industry, that's had an absolutely, it's 95% decrease in demand. These organisations, the major airlines and the service providers to the airlines, work in a yield management system which requires 90 to 95% usage of their airlines and seats and spaces, etc. Hotels, restaurants operate on the same basis. So that's obviously that is a massive financial implications for organisations which operate on very narrow margins as well. So the next phase, prepare for a protracted period of muted and highly uncertain growth. And I think that's one of the big things which is going to be the challenge. Predicting growth, even whenever international travel opens up, how many people are going to be reluctant to travel internationally? How many people are going to be reluctant to stay in hotels, to go to restaurants, etc.? We've had lots of discussions in the educational context about schools reopening, but parents and to a lesser degree teachers raising concerns about what that means actually. Okay, so the next area again, Accenture, very interestingly talked about the never normal. Create rapid new operating and business models to compete in markets that have likely forever changed. So the change, we're not going to go back to the way it was before. We're going to see big changes. Okay. Lockdown has affected obviously the majority of the global workforce. Most countries have begun to take a phased approach to reopening, beginning with essential sectors. And I suppose the concern from an HR and a people perspective is that we're now seeing evidence that we're going to have to go back to the more draconian phases of the process. So the city of Leicester is obviously in lockdown again now. We've had over the last few days Melbourne and in Australia, which has a much lower rate of infection, etc., has gone into lockdown measures. In the state of California, 14 counties in the state of California are actually reintroducing lockdown measures. So that's incredibly challenging for businesses and organisations. Think we're on a pathway to reopening, and then suddenly the goal moves again. It's 2 weeks later. How many of those businesses will actually then say, we can't reopen, we can't, etc. And we'll talk a bit about furlough and the furlough scheme and what that means as well. Okay, so one of the things we need to think about in reopening sectors is national and business leaders need to consider the extent of jobs in sectors can actually be performed from home, and that's been a big change. Okay, and there's lots of discussion from an organisational perspective and people's perspective to say, well, what happens in terms of working from home, okay? Also to consider what happens when reopening in terms of lost jobs and outputs, okay? What happens with regard to workforce exposure as well, okay? So next slide, please, Lucia. Okay, so what we have here is a collection of sources which are looking at the challenges in reopening, which are greater from some industries and sectors than others. And I was delighted whenever we seen the attendance list today about how diverse the range of organisations represented and individuals were represented. Okay, so what we have here is a combination of resources looking at job data from the International Labour Organisation, working from home data from Dingle and Newman, and also occupational risk from the Visual Capitalist. So a range of sources, okay? And what you can see is the number of jobs which are in these areas, key industries, etc. So, and also considering very high occupational risk but vital. So public service, and obviously we've had lots of discussion about key workers and people working in hospitals, people working in key industries and sectors, etc. That very high risk, but it was vital that they remained in work, okay? Moving to high occupational risk, which is not essential. So things like retailing, media and entertainment, etc. You've obviously at the very top there, health and public service. Lower occupational risk, but essential as well, construction, logistics, manufacturing, etc. Okay, and then essential but can be performed from home, professional services, financial services, communication and technology, etc. What the indications are that in the US labour market, 37% of jobs can plausibly be performed at home. So is the home working, is this going to be, again, when it really comes to the fore? 48.5% of jobs in the UK can plausibly be performed at home. Now we'll talk about what the challenges are of that. 42.7 jobs in Ireland can plausibly be performed at home effectively, etc. And then what are the experiences, okay? So next slide, please, Lucia. So given these circumstances, what do companies need to do? They need to commit to a programme of active reinvention right now, and I think I'm seeing evidence of that from lots of organisations in terms of what they're doing. So navigate the scenario uncertainties, given the range of potential scenarios in the evolution of the crisis. Companies need to be prepared to change course at lightning speed. And I think that's one of the fears companies have of what happens if we go to reopening and then we have to lock down again. What impact does that have? If we bring back our furloughed staff, what happens? What does the scheme offer in terms of those staff have to be furloughed again? What are the implications of that? You have to obviously mitigate immediate challenges. Employees are clearly going to be concerned with the prospect of physical interaction while the virus is still circulating. So companies therefore need to provide a safe and secure working environment, communicating with the workforce transparently to build trust. And that becomes one of the things that we have to be very aware of, is that we very much have, in terms of the HR models and the different generations within the workforce, they have different views and expectations with regards to work. So very interestingly, millennials are much more pluralist and collective and enjoy the social interaction of the workplace than old Generation X, Generation Y, etc. So people who've been in the labour market for a while. And that's fascinating to think of how you're going to adapt and change that. So the biggest problem for millennials who've been working from home, despite the fact they're technologically much more savvy than previous generations, the feeling of isolation, the lack of social interaction with their peers in the workplace, etc. And maybe they don't have the same pressures on them as people who are further in their careers. So working parents, people with caring responsibilities. Millennials tend to have less of those responsibilities. So their spectrum tends to be their social life and work. And for many of them, the social side of work is very important, and they're missing that workplace interaction, okay? So that's something we need to be very aware of, that the different generations within the labour market have different expectations, okay? Also, the idea of building a better future. Companies should not reopen by reinventing the old ways. We need processes and capabilities which are a stepping stone to longer term business transformation, Okay, and we're seeing lots of businesses which are actually trying to transform themselves and adapt. Okay, so next slide, please. So what needs to happen? What are the phases? Okay, so a program of active reinvention that outmaneuvers uncertain starts with these 5 areas. So number 1, put people first. Knowing what's really going on in the lives of employees is essential to creating the next generation successful business. Technology, processes, employees need to become more truly human in how they interact with people. And from an HR perspective, I'm seeing a much stronger approach to soft HR rather than hard HR. So the idea that people are the most important, organization's most important asset, that mental well-being is critically important as well, that organizations are taking that into account. They're taking into account the challenges people have in completing their normal workload and performance with juggling things like homeschooling, caring for elderly parents, etc., the issues with dealing with technology, etc. Okay, so that becomes part of it. And the big byline here, and one of the big takeaways, certainly from the last 3 to 4 months, is it's about compassionate leadership. What will be effective in moving forward is compassionate leadership. Okay, and I think if we want one case study example of that, I think universally Jacinda Ardern, who's the New Zealand Prime Minister, has been lauded for the approach she has taken with regard to leading her country, compassionate leadership, being proactive, etc. And I think there's a link there to an Irish Times article which looks at the idea of power and competence linked to compassion as well. And Jacinda Ardern's been talked about this prior to COVID in terms of how an effective a leader she actually has been. And I think that's a fantastic model for organisations. Look at how the New Zealand leadership model and her approach has filtered through in terms of the country and in terms of the economy and in terms of key stakeholders. Design workplace spaces that work, create safe working environments, also consider the physical hybrid way of working, support employees for well-being and mental health is a key priority. And one of the things I was really pleased about when I looked at the delegate list was the number of people who are coming from well-being and mental health areas within their organisations. And I think that is critically important. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety within our populations and within our workforces. And that role in terms of mental well-being is critically important. Solving phases. The reopening is just the start. Companies should plan for phased return. Companies should also see that it's not a time to return to the normal, because that won't work. The simple reality is the normal will not work. We have a new environment where there's a huge amount of uncertainty, etc. Okay. Commit to elastic cost structures. Short-term liquidity. Companies will need to focus on their longer-term financial health and affordability of the business. And I think one of the challenges for organisations is that those who actually haven't long-term financial health are going to be at most risk. And I think the organisations which will prosper and succeed from this have had that long-term view. And I think why there are big challenges for aviation, hospitality, retail, etc., is because there hasn't been that long-term financial health and affordability of the business. Okay, and that's important. This means moving from rapid cost reductions to building a resilient cost management mindset, and the idea from balance sheet projection to long-term investment. And I think that's the mindset we're looking at there too. So get future ready. Secret to long-term success is reopening in terms of building new capabilities. Fresh approaches to innovation, and I'm very conscious that Martin is an expert in innovation, and that's an area which I'm fascinated by. So supporting by holistic technology strategies that support innovation at scale. Purpose, empathy, and agility must be at the centre of new customer growth opportunities as well. That's critically important. So next slide, please. So what are the people priorities in the new norm? Whenever I was putting this together, I did a lot of desk-based research and searches to try and find things which were, first of all, not just rhetoric, but were usable, and I thought could be really beneficial for organisations from an HR perspective. So I found some fascinating analysis by the Boston Consultancy Group, And I think it's very pragmatic, but it's very linear and it's very succinct. So 7 people principles were what they call the new now. Okay, so smart work, accommodate virtual collaboration and remote work at scale. Try a new approach that balances remote and on-site work. Set up smart workplaces, realise the cost upsides in terms of doing this as well. Physical and mental health, cultivate physical health capabilities, make mental health and mindfulness matter. And to reinforce that point, I'm delighted by the number of professionals who have joined the session today who have that background, because those people are critically important to the well-being of our workforce and the well-being of our employees. Promote well-being and resilience, and make, instead of being rhetoric, make that the reality in organisations. New paradigm for skills and talent, create an adaptive learning ecosystem, upskill and reskill by building digital capabilities at scale. And I see from in terms of HR flows, recruitment and selection, training and development, pay and rewards, performance management, it's a great opportunity actually to bring upskilling and reskilling in a digital platform to the fore. I think digital onboarding and induction is going to be critically important for organisations as well, whenever people can't come into the physical workplace, to do that in a digital way, etc. Really, really important. Refocus and enable talent programs and platforms. And again, talent coming into the organisation, how do they operate in a very uncertain environment, etc. Flexible working, make your workforce cost and skills planning dynamic. Tailor working models for employees, ask employees what works for them, what works best for them. Trust your employees. All the evidence is that people working from home are equally, if not more, productive than they are in the office environment where the opportunity exists. And actually, the work-life balance in the environment allows them to work more effectively and efficiently, etc. And I think the anecdotal example is lots of organisations have meetings for staff whenever the staff have quite a long commute to get to the meetings, and that adds to the whole element. Whereas a virtual meeting means that they can schedule everything around that. So leadership with head, heart and hands. And I think, again, Jacinta Ardern's a fantastic example of that, leading with the head, but also with the heart. The idea of emotional intelligence and empathy being one of the key things for leaders, and the successful organisations have leaders who have those traits. So lead with empathy and direction, very clear direction and focus. Enable and empower frontline leaders, and develop continuous two-way communication platform as well. And I think that one of the things from my perspective, which I've really found very beneficial during this period as an employee, is the level of two-way engagement. And I congratulate Martin in particular for his leadership in that context. There's been very much two-way communication platforms within the university and within his leadership. And I think it's important that that filters across all organisations. Foster a culture of resilience. Align purpose, vision and values. What are the values we're moving forward with? How are we changing? Commit to sustain social impact at a higher level. And we've heard a lot about the social impact. And then this idea, which I think Boston Consultancy Group's analysis is fantastic in this area, bionic organisation. Harness that in digital platforms, use artificial intelligence and algorithms to complement, not replace. I've added that bit, not replace humans. The idea that algorithms and artificial intelligence will replace people is not going to happen. So it should be a partnership rather than something we need to fear and we need to worry about. Adopt agile approaches at scale and simplify your operating model. Actually focus on your core business and make sure your core customers are satisfied and happy. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is just giving you some web links and examples of what organisations have actually done in the context of HR flows and the new norm. So predict demand shifts, assess skill profiles, connect workers at scale, accelerate learning and foster shared resilience. So an example, recruitment and selection. In retail and some service areas, there's been a massive increase in recruitment and selection. So high-profile organisations like Tesco and Walmart, Asda, Amazon have gone through extensive recruitment and selection processes. and dramatically increase their workforce to match the demand. Okay, the challenge will be whenever we go back, how many of those people are kept on within the organisations when the demand balances out. Training and development, including onboarding, people management, have a fantastic article which looks at how learning and development has had a revolution during COVID. A really, really useful article. Pay and rewards, again, looking at what Walmart have done in terms of their global operations with regards to staff bonuses, hiring temporary workers. So it's fascinating to see how quickly organisations have actually responded and sped up their human resource processes to embrace the demand on their organisations. Okay, flexibility. The BBC have done a fantastic series of articles under that link, looking at how flexibility, working from home being more normal, etc., what that means. So there's some very, very good web links there to try and give some practical applied examples, which you can then look at, well, how does this map with my own organisation? How does it map with your companies, what you're doing in the future? Now, the one thing I haven't included there, but it's a big issue in terms of HR flows and the new norm. Lots of organisations are actually going to downsize, okay? And we have had, in the last 24 hours, 12,000 job losses announced in 3 or 4 high-profile UK-based organisations, because literally the demand for their products and services has gone down 95%. I think one of the labour market things that organisations are thinking about, how many people who have gone on furlough are going to come back into the organisation. So what are organisations doing in terms of the furlough scheme in the UK to make sure that they get as many of those people back into the organisation as possible? So how quickly can they get to the reopening and recovery stage, etc. Okay, I'm very encouraged by the Bank of England prediction about this idea of a V-shaped recovery. And I think that's very, very interesting, actually, that they think the economy will recover very, very quickly and very rapidly, etc. Okay, so next slide, please. So that's the final slide from me in terms of, and we now open it up to what I think is probably the real benefit of these type of events is getting your questions, getting your observations, and our hope is that this will be the first of a series of activities and events, and we'll have ongoing engagement, and we will follow this through. So we're very, very happy now to respond to questions, observations, etc.
Thank you so much, Trevor. This would be the stage in a live event where you would be treated to a round of applause. Instead, we have questions from the audience to offer, and thank you very much for being very engaged. So looking at the questions we have received, we can find certain focal points. You mentioned throughout your presentation, agility, flexibility is very important, but then also highlighted the opportunities to build better futures by exploring different and new processes. And what's become very also important is the type of leadership that is offered, is provided, specifically with a view towards employer-employee relations. And one of the most questions hits right into that area. How can one align a drive towards more agility that involves more flexibility within a culture of employer-employee relations? I think there is a lot of uncertainty and anxiety there about well, safeguards being removed. But what you say is this is not the right way. So one of the questions we got from Alan, for instance, was flexibility in the workforce seems critical to enable agility. How should public policy promote flexibility whilst safeguarding those who have been previously been exploited by the unfair use of zero-hour contracts was one example.
Yeah, so I think the original models of human resource management very much fell into two strategic types, hard and soft approaches. And I think from certainly in the last 10 years plus, particularly moving from the global financial crisis, a lot of organizations had implemented a much harder approach to managing their people. Okay, so in terms of 0 hours contracts, fixed term contracts, etc., a very strong focus on individualization, etc. Now, the soft approach to human resource management is much more about high commitment, high quality, high flexibility, etc. Okay, and flexibility, I think, falls into two categories. I think functional flexibility is going to be key. Okay, so making sure that organizations have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities from their workforce to deal with the evolving environment. Okay, also re-looking at what constitutes numerical flexibility as well. And I think lots of organizations need to re-look at the numbers of people they have and actually ensuring that the skill sets are correct. So I think that the idea of flexibility will also come down to the work environment in terms of the operational side of things as well. I think the idea of employers in many cases have been very reluctant to support working from home because they're suspicious about it. There's an element of, in a hard HR approach, you lose that idea of control. Okay, it's been driven by necessity, and I think one of the things that the feedback is from the HR function and from leaders in organisations is they've actually been incredibly pleasantly surprised by how effective people have been working from home, how their core work gets done, the performance levels are actually as expected or higher than expected, etc. So I think that's going to be part of flexibility as well. Now, if you think about the idea of HR and flexibility, one of the biggest challenges in terms of knowledge, skills and abilities in organisations is actually labour market constraints. So if you think about the University of Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland and you think about the labour market, okay, we're not in an urban labour market. We're not in, even compared to the central belt in Scotland in terms of Glasgow and Edinburgh. So the labour market is a challenge, okay, particularly for the range of jobs in the organisation. If you think about having knowledge workers and having the ability to have a blended approach to work, and blended has become very, very, very topical, okay, so having a blended approach to work, okay, means that you can give those people the flexibility where you massively increase your talent pool who are prepared to engage and be in the workplace, not in the normal Monday to Friday 9 to 5 type environment. And I think that has big advantages for flexibility and skills of your workforce as well. The big changes in the labour market that, you know, the commute to work, etc., is a big inhibitor for people whenever they think about taking up a job in a certain organisation. So I think for those jobs in that category we looked at in the slide where working from home is highly plausible, that creates much more flexibility in terms of your labour market as well.
You pointed to the opportunities there. People in the audience like Susan would like to know where the biggest challenges are in terms of managing people working from home. And I mean, you mentioned trust as an important part in leadership.
Yeah, I think if you think about the idea of high commitment, okay, and I think commitment is in many cases a social interaction that colleagues espouse their commitment to each other and their support for each other. It's amazing how important, if you like, cultural artifacts are and workplace artifacts. So having a cup of coffee with your colleagues in a communal area, going for a coffee in a coffee shop, etc. And I think that's one of the challenges. You know, that the informal chats where a line manager, a supervisor can say to somebody, listen, I've been observing you. You're doing a fantastic job. That becomes slightly more artificial. You know, as human beings, we tend to like that social interaction as well, and we compartmentalize our lives. And I think that is one of the big challenges that certainly for the last 3 to 4 months, home has become all-encompassing. So instead of it being and the challenge is the boundaries blur as well. And I think one of the challenges that in terms of workforce is asking employees who are working from home to actually think about the fact of compartmentalizing things and saying, you know, that you shouldn't be working from home at 11 o'clock at night, just because simply your laptop's still out and you can catch up on emails, etc. So encouraging employees to have some sort of structure, some sort of protocol. Now, having meetings and having catch-ups and that type of thing works very well. But I think one of the challenges for people working from home is not the idea of performance and not working hard enough, trying to stretch themselves too far and being hugely conscious of the fact that I have to show I'm working at 110%. Because I'm not physically visible to the hierarchy of the organisation.
That's really important to highlight. Conscious efforts needs to be undertaken to achieve a work-life balance, and mental health might be a challenge. Before we move in the final phase of the Q&A session to the building a better future part, one quick question that we got from Brian, who would be interested to learn more about your thoughts about the impacts of furlough, redundancy developments on the physical and mental health of people who are now more or less active job seekers.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly challenging area, and I think there is absolutely no doubt about it that you mentioned the fourth edition of our book. One of the things we've done over the last few months is actually totally rewrite the chapter on strategic downsizing. And one of the big things to think about is, you know, for some people, there is a genuine fear, and I think the less transparent organisations are doing this as well, that furlough is simply a stepping stone to compulsory or voluntary redundancy processes. And I think there's a big fear of that within employees, with trade unions, even within leadership and organisations, that with the best intentions, they're not sure that the furloughed employees will come back into the organisation because they don't know what it's going to look like. The other side of things, obviously, is that in terms of the labour market, okay, that be made redundant in the current context is incredibly challenging, because unlike other economic downturns where certain sectors went into decline, but other sectors actually grew and expanded, this has almost been universal across all industries and sectors, probably with the exception of retailing and maybe the distribution and logistics companies. Virtually every sector has been impacted. You know, the indications are that in terms of the number of jobs lost to the UK economy, the only comparable in the pre-war period will be whenever the Margaret Thatcher's government in the early 1980s decided to close down the mining industry in the UK. So that's comparable to the number of job losses. The indications are that in the short term, so 1 to 3 years, unemployment could go as high as 15%. So that's the UK figure. The European figures are likely to be higher. The US figure could, the figure for unemployment in the US could go between 22 and 25% of the labour market. Okay, so that's that's one of the big challenges. And I think this is where the agenda comes for skilling and reskilling. And I think one of what tends to happen whenever we go through periods of substantial economic downturn, redundancies, people look to reskill. So from my perspective, I think higher education has a big role to play here in terms of and further education as well, offering people the opportunities to reskill. And I think that's where the government also need to think about post-furlough, the furlough financial scheme, really looking at apprenticeship schemes, modern apprenticeships, upskilling support and financial support for people to allow them to do that. as part of the normal benefits and support for people who've been made unemployed. I think the idea of government-supported upskilling and reskilling is critically important.
That was a very exhaustive answer to a really important question. Thank you so much, Trevor. We pretty much have run out of time. If you can manage a 15 to 20-second answer to a point we get about moving to a better future, building a better future. One of our audience members asked about the new norm, which needs to be greener, and how this might be going to be built in during developments starting now. Is innovation the answer?
Yeah. So, yeah, very quickly, I think working from home has an advantage because obviously the environmental cost of having huge head offices, huge bill, etc., is very, very useful. I think we've now realised that international travel for work is not critical. And I think that idea of international air travel for work, that will substantially help CO2 emissions. It will set, and I think that's going to, does somebody have to go halfway across the world for a business meeting? We've learned that the technology tends to work very, very well, so I think that, if you like, the carbon footprint is likely to be substantively changed because companies realise we don't need to have people travelling all over the world on business meetings, etc. We can do it in a very different way and embrace digital technology.
Trevor, thank you so much for your presentation and the insights you shared with us. We're coming to the end. Let me thank the audience for really thought-provoking questions. I hope we managed to cover most of them. This brings us to the end of this session. This is not the last one. This is merely the beginning of more. We will continue this series with a presentation on artificial intelligence, discussing the future of work with Professor Donald Heslop on Thursday, the 20th of August at 10 a.m. We will send out a booking link along with a survey to get a bit of feedback on today's session. One thing is probably clear: we need more time for questions. So thank you once more. We really greatly value the role you as businesses, alumni, and donor already play with the business school, and we love to hear from you. We love to engage with you. We welcome your continued support and involvement. Many of us are headed into the summer break, so let me wish you a good summer. Take care, keep safe, and thank you once more for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Martin.
Bye-bye.